Well, good morning and welcome. My name is James Perry, and I'm the co-founder of the B Corporation movement in the UK. And what a time it is to be having this event. There's chaos outside. The world's largest financial centre might be just across the river, but part of this city are shut down by a rebellion. And our political masters seem to have completely abandoned reason. So this is anything but business as usual for our politics and for our planet. And I suppose our goal over the next 30 minutes is to understand whether the emerging turmoil has anything to do with our system of capitalism. And if so, what might we do about it? With me are Colin, Sophi, and Alexandra. Colin is one of the world's leading authorities on the purpose of business and therefore the purpose of capitalism, operating out of Oxford University. And he's long been a friend and actually a guide, I suppose, to the B Corporation movement. And he's just published a book called Prosperity, which is the very word used by the current rulebook to justify itself. Alexandra is an economist specializing in index creation. She used to run the Prosperity Index, which ranks countries on a series of metrics beyond GDP. And more recently, she's just in the process of creating the Responsibility 100, which ranks FTSE 100 companies on their performance against the Sustainable Development Goals. And Sophi is one of the UK's leading social business leaders. She's been chief executive of Divine Chocolate for 20 years. And not only is Divine a certified B Corporation, but actually it's been an inspiration to many of us for the many ways that it creates value for so many. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you about tomorrow's economic rulebook. And I'll start with you, Colin, if that's okay. And my question, I suppose, to start is, does the turmoil that we're seeing outside and around us, and it sort of feels like a kind of gathering turmoil, it feels like we're sort of, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Do you think that has anything to do with business as usual?
Yes, it absolutely underlies what we see going on outside. Because on the one hand, business has been a source of massive growth and prosperity. But as we're seeing, it's been a cause of growing inequality, environmental degradation, and mistrust. And that simply cannot go on. And what underpins that is we've got the wrong model of business. We've got a model of business that's based on a principle that emerged in the 1960s, associated with Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, who said that there is one and only one social purpose of business: to increase profits so long as it stays within the rules of the game. And that's been the basis of business practice, policy, and education around the world. But it's also the case that it was not the original form of the corporation. The corporation was established under Roman law to undertake a very public function of collecting taxes, minting coins, looking after public buildings, and for nearly all of its 2,000-year history, it's combined a public role with its commercial activities. It's only over the last 60 years that this notion that the only purpose of business is to make money has arisen. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Because while technology offers the opportunity for enhancing our social well-being, it also poses serious risks. And so long as it's the case that business is just focused on profits, there will be dramatically devastating outcomes from that technological innovation. But things are changing. Larry Fink, the CEO and president of the largest investment management business in the world, recently said, every business needs to have a purpose. Not a strapline or a marketing campaign, but a statement of its fundamental reason for being, what it does on a daily basis. Purpose, he said, is not the sole pursuit of profits, but the animating force for achieving them. And last month, more than 180 of the leaders of the largest corporations in the world jettisoned the notion of what is termed shareholder primacy, by which the prime role of companies is to their shareholders, and said the purpose of business is to deliver value for customers, to invest in employees, to deal fairly with their suppliers, to look after their communities, to sustain their environments, and to deliver long-term value for their shareholders. And now that reflects a growing realization of the importance of why business is created, why it exists, what it's there to do, what it aspires to become, namely its purpose. And the purpose of business is not solely to produce profits. The purpose of business is to produce profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet, and not to profit from producing problems for people or planet. Now that means it's not simply about philanthropy, it is about delivering returns for investors as well, but doing so through delivering solutions to the problems that we as people and planet face. And to do that, we have to make business trustworthy in terms of delivering on that. And that depends on their commitments and their values of honesty and integrity, and commitment to the delivery of those purposes. And that's where the B Corp movement is so important, because it sets out that alternative agenda for companies going forward, and a demonstration that they're really committed to do that. Now, we're running a big program at the British Academy on the future of the corporation, which is looking at how do we bring about the systems change that is needed to create these corporations. And we've identified 4 pairs of areas that have to be focused on: law and regulation, ownership and governance, measurement and performance, which we'll hear about from Alexandra in just a minute, and finance and investment. And those 4 levers have to be pulled if we're really to shift our business in the right direction. Now, I want to just end by illustrating in relation to one company that I think exemplifies what I'm talking about very well. It's a manufacturer of insulin. It's a very large pharmaceutical company. It's a Danish company called Novo Nordisk. And it's been very successful in manufacturing and delivering insulin, but it realized it was not reaching the most important market in the world for its product, which is namely sufferers from type 2 diabetes, in particular in the developing part of the world, who couldn't afford, in many cases, to purchase their insulin. And so it started to think about, well, what is its real purpose? And it began to realize its purpose was not simply to produce insulin. Its purpose was to stop people or treat people who got diabetes. And so it started working with medical practitioners, with hospitals, with universities around the world to find the best ways of treating diabetes, which might or might not involve using insulin. And then it realized actually its purpose wasn't just about helping people treat diabetes, but to stop them getting diabetes in the first place. And its purpose statement now is to eliminate diabetes in the world. So it then started working as well with communities, with local health workers, with governments, to identify the changes in lifestyles which would help people avoid getting diabetes in the first place. Now you might say, well, that's all well, very worthy and good, but doesn't it undermine Novo Nordisk's model? And the answer is absolutely not. It's thrived on the basis of it. Why? Because it's built up trust with the medical practitioner world, with governments, with local authorities around the world, and its business has boomed on the back of it. And that demonstrates how repurposing companies can not only help to deliver solutions that we as people and planet face, but also to deliver better business. Because ultimately, trustworthy businesses are commercially successful businesses, and the competitiveness of nations depends on the trustworthiness and purposefulness of businesses for the prosperity of the many, not just of the few, for the future as well as the present.
Thank you. Thank you. And if we had longer, actually, I'd love to talk a bit about Novo Nordisk's ownership model and how ownership can really promote a different kind of idea of what the purpose of business is. But we've heard there that, if you like, business has been given the wrong instructions. It's an incredibly powerful machine, and it's been given an operating system to do something, and it's just got the wrong operating system. But when I was trained in a different lifetime at Cadbury Limited, one of the things I was taught was what gets measured gets done. And of course, what we look at when we think about business is its financial returns, and everything gets boiled down on pink pages to a set of numbers around yield and capital growth and the rest of it. So if we're serious about repurposing business, presumably we have to start thinking about what they report to us and how we look at their performance differently. And this is an area of your expertise, Alexandra.
Well, I just want to say, as a Dane, it's really lovely to hear you highlight Novo Nordisk. It's great to hear about that. But yeah, we try to put numbers around what Colin is talking about. And we set about taking the FTSE 100 and thinking about responsibility and how do we measure big companies like them on responsibility. And we use the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework, as a prism through which to hook our principles upon and base our data selection on. So it was no small task, I may add. It's 100 companies with 20,000 subsidiaries, and we crawled through 10 million words for keyword analysis on everything that was self-reported. We went through 400 sources, and we ended up with 5,000 data points across 52 indicators that more or less mapped onto the areas of the Sustainable Development Goals that are relevant for companies. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals are not particularly well designed for the private sector. They are created by nations, for nations predominantly, so the 169 indicators that lie beneath the 17 goals, probably only around 27 are relevant for corporations. So we set about looking at those that were relevant and mapping companies on what they were doing across these areas where they could make a difference. It was very much born out of a conversation that happened about 4 or 5 months ago, where we were talking to people who had been part of the designing of the SDGs, and it was sitting back and saying, actually, it's 2 minutes to midnight. The goals are meant to be reached by 2030, and who's, and some countries are regressing, and some are doing what they can, but what are the roles of citizens, and what are the role of corporations? So that's sort of what made it sort of an urgent task, we felt. But we went through all of the data analysis, and we created a ranking of the FTSE 100. But I think what was most interesting that came out of it was this picture that emerged of the rhetoric versus the reality, and that we looked at all of the commitments in the annual reports, in the sustainability reports, and signing up to the UN Global Compact, and all of the things that companies can talk about in terms of stating their commitment to the sustainability agenda. But then we looked across the aisle and looked at sort of what are they actually doing. And so we sort of slightly cheekily made a score. We had the overall ranking, and then we came up with a talk versus walk score. And then when we looked at the gap there, we saw quite an interesting different ranking come about, and that created. We released the index 2 weeks ago, and we've had a lot of engagement. 63 of the 100 have come forward and engaged and responded. Some were not so happy, and some were very constructive and productive in their responses. And part of now I've built indices my whole career, and the reason why I like the format of an index is that it creates a race to the top. It's a behavioral a nudge tool to show who's doing well and who's not, and it highlights gaps. In this particular instance, it highlights gaps in data, it highlights gaps in performance. But when we looked at the rhetoric versus reality, or the talk versus walk, it was very interesting to be able to, and that was to the point of the 2 minutes to midnight. It's like there's a lot of talk about we need to do this, and then when you then hold it up against the actual actions, that discrepancy is quite alarming. And we sort of, it's anything from committing to gender equality and not doing anything about it, or being fined on things that you're committed to, saying environmental infractions or currency fixing, or being pulled to tribunals on things that are against decent work, which is there in the SDGs, or it could be not reporting on waste or not doing what you're saying in terms of your climate and water and waste commitments. So it became very clear, that here are the commitments and here are the actions. I think one of the things that also in the subsequent discussions have come out is that one thing is to be committed verbally, then there are some actions, but actually it's time to not just walk, but it's time to run, because we need to do, the urgency is obvious from what's going on around us, and so I hope that the next sort of iteration of this could be a talk score and a walk score and a run score. I should add that this index is in beta mode. The point of that is that we want this to be in consultation with the big companies. We want to expand it across, we want to go beyond the FTSE 100. We want to make sure that this is very clearly understood, that this is on publicly available data. The point is that it should not be hard to find the evidence for the contributions towards the SDGs, and I must add it was really hard to find. It took us a long time. And it shouldn't be that hard. The companies that are measured on these, or there are indices out there, the FTSE Russell, the Dow Jones does it, it's very much behind paywall. There's slightly a sense of a black box. We don't quite know what goes into it, why companies come out where they are in terms of their ranking. So we wanted to do something different. We wanted to get it right out in front, make it completely publicly available. All the data sources have to be public, and our methodology and our data is also public and open. So it's in beta mode. We launched formally in January, but it really is, the point of this is to start a conversation, not end it.
Wonderful, thank you. And I noticed when I was looking at it that the top-ranked company in the beta version, it was Unilever, and I loved the response of the chief executive of Unilever, who, to your point about walking and running, said, look, it's terrific and everything that we're top of this index, but really we need to go a lot faster. So I think there's an awakening recognition amongst some of the FTSE leaders that we have a pretty profound issue. So the big companies are obviously a major part of the solution. The companies in the FTSE 100 employ 4 million people just within those 100 companies. Also there are 3 million businesses in the UK economy alone, and all of them need to change, and all of them need to think differently, and they all need inspiration and people to follow. And I think Divine has been doing that for such a long time, and certainly it's been very influential to me. And on one level, people will look at a company like Divine and think, you sell chocolate, you have input costs, you need to make a margin, you make a profit, that's what business is about. You think completely differently about value, Sophie.
Yes, so I wanted to say thank you for inviting me today. It's very exciting to be here with so many companies that believe that business can be a force for good, but also so many people who want to make that commitment real. That's all of you. And so that's why you're here today, is to get that inspiration. So Divine are a bit of an old hand at this. We've been going for 20 years, and our story began when a group of cocoa farmers in Ghana, who were organised in a cooperative, voted to set up a chocolate company. And so our big idea is to turn business as usual on its head by making the farmers, who have been up to then invisible and who have been the most exploited people, to become the biggest shareholders in the company. And so ownership, we think, is important. We care about who owns things, who gets the money, and where the power lies. So by transferring ownership to people who currently derive the least value and probably work the hardest to make the crop that makes chocolate possible, we not only give a better income to them, but we also are able to forge a real connection between those growers, the industry that they're a part of, and the chocolate lovers, who I hope we all are, who buy their product. With that increased knowledge and participation comes power for farmers, and it means that they can share some of the value, some of the wealth, some of the understanding, but also some of the responsibility, because they're the people who are working on the ground growing the cocoa. In a practical level, because you're sort of thinking, well, that sounds all quite nice, doesn't it? It means that we pay a guaranteed fair trade price and premium for all of the cocoa and the sugar that we buy, and they get to decide how they spend that money. We invest 2% of our top line, our revenue, our turnover, in working with farmers to help them build the capacity of their businesses, to make sure that they include women in their organisation, to help them improve their agricultural activities, but also to help them diversify and have mitigation strategies for the impact of climate change that they really live on a daily basis. They also have 2 directors on our board, because that's where decisions get made about how the company is run. And because they own 44% of the company, then they get 44% of any profit that is distributed. This means that for the first time in history, those farmers are receiving a share of the wealth that they helped to create. And if Divine was sold tomorrow, they would be the people who decided to sell it, and they would be the people who got the lion's share of the money. I think then what I hope that we've done is inspire people to think that a different world is possible, because when we started 20 years ago and said we were going to make a success of a chocolate company that was owned by cocoa farmers, people thought that that was really unfeasible. They would have loved to live in a world where that was possible, but they really didn't think that was possible in a market that was enormously mature and very valuable. Chocolate's worth £4.6 billion in Britain, and it's dominated by 3 huge corporations. And so that I hope that by doing what Divine's done, we've inspired other people to think a different world is possible. But some of the things that have been very important for us to achieve this has been patient long-term investors who really share our purpose and put a value on that purpose, so that they are looking at what they get for their money, but part of what they want to get for their money is the social and environmental impact that this sort of business delivers. The other thing that we've had is engaged consumers who have been concerned and who've gone out of their way to ask for our products to be stocked in their shops, in their schools, in their workplaces, and have really told their friends and families about it. The next stage of our journey has, in 2016, we became a B Corp because we felt that this was a way to take our journey to the next stage and to join a dynamic global network of companies who wanted to use business as a force for good. We liked the transparency at the heart of B Corp, which helps us all look at businesses, look inside companies, and to take meaningful comparisons. It looks at how they are governed, and we're governed by cocoa farmers. It looks at how they treat their employees. It looks at how they relate to the communities around them. And it also looks at how what they're actually doing to fulfill their claims on sustainability. And I think this is very important in terms of how we mobilize citizens of the world who are buying things, who are investing their money, who are working for or with companies, so that together we really can create the world that we all want to live in. And so we're really proud to be a B Corp, and we hope that the change that we all want to happen will happen at the speed it really needs to happen at, to support our children and our grandchildren and that wonderful young woman who just did her poem on stage.
Thank you, Sophie. And I think that stronger together and being part of something much bigger than we can do on our own is like at the heart of our theory of change, and certainly the joy of doing this work. We're nearly out of time, and I'm really pleased that you were able to share more deeply about your different perspectives. In terms of therefore wrapping it up, I'm going to ask you, I'm afraid I'm going to put you on the spot. We haven't prepared this. The panelists don't know what they're about to be asked. It's about tomorrow's economic rulebook and challenging business as usual. And I suppose each of you might have a different answer, but if you had a sort of golden bullet to, Milton Friedman talked about, business should maximize profits whilst obeying the rules of the game. The rules of the game are established by regulators and policymakers, politicians ultimately. So if we had the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Secretary of State for Business, the Prime Minister, the Chairman of the Bank of England, the Chairman of the FCA and so on sitting in front of us right now, and we had one thing we could say to them, what would it be? So that's my question. I'm just going to breathe so that everyone can say, I hope he doesn't ask me first. And actually, I'm going to ask Colin first.
Ownership. And I'm going to come back to both what Sophi was talking about and your question
And
to me.
do keep your answers shortish
Okay,
on the basis that we're...
I'll be very short. The ownership of Novo Nordisk is an industrial foundation. It's owned by a foundation. And that foundation has the objective of ensuring that the purpose of the company is fulfilled and that the values are upheld in the business. We have the wrong form of ownership. We have ownership of companies, of large companies, that is dispersed, that does not have an interest of a purpose beyond profit. And the fact that we have reached this is a consequence of the way in which we structured our law. So what I would say to the government is we need to think about a legal system which recognizes not just the property rights of owners on which it's based, but their role as responsible trustees of our planet and our people. And we need to think about reformulating our laws around that notion of business as being trustees, not just properties of their shareholders.
Fantastic.
Yes. I very much agree with what Colin said. I think in the spirit of what Colin said, it is, and from a data perspective, it is, when you really do see change when regulation, when requirements are posed on companies to report, and they've got to report beyond just the normal P&L, as you said, and if you start putting more emphasis on the responsibility that we have beyond the business, but put that in terms of the regulatory requirement to report on that, I think we'll start to see more running rather than walking, and that's hopefully that's where we all want to end up.
Wonderful, wonderful, thank you.
So I think, I obviously agree with both of them, and I think in terms of company reporting, there could be some very simple things to do. So if you actually published pay differentials, then I think that would be a very quick way to start bringing up the lowest paid people. Because I think the thing that I would like to put forward is the idea that people have the right to have a living income, and that we need to look at the way of delivering that, and that can be about bringing up that everybody has to pay a living wage, but throughout your supply chain you need to pay a living wage. And I think one of the ways to get that to happen and to get us as users of products and investors in companies and people who work for companies is to put that absolutely in the public domain in a way that we can understand it, so that we can all join in with it. Because obviously it's great that people like you are looking at creating indexes which are really technical, but I'm sort of into a consumer, I'm into a citizens movement to make the world a better place. And we need to have some meaningful information so we can support companies that do the right thing and lobby companies that don't.
Yeah. Oh, can I just say something?
I think we're out of time.
Okay.
Yeah. We could carry on. We could carry on all morning. I mean, this is such a fascinating conversation, and we have three incredible experts sharing their perspectives. I mean, I think what's clear is the current rule book is driving us to a place that the human race really needs not to go. Change is not only necessary, but hopefully it's inevitable. Change needs to be shaped in a positive way by thoughtful people who know what they're talking about, like you guys. So thank you for coming and sharing, and we wish you all the very best with your respective work. So please join me in thanking them.
Thank you.